Hello friends, for today's video I want to go through a list of some adult fantasy works with actual adult characters. In order for a book to qualify to be on this list, it needs to do more than just have adult characters within it. It needs to actually center them in some fashion, either through, at the very least, these characters having their own perspectives, or the entirety of the story being dedicated to them. While of course stories with younger protagonists are fantastic and important and very significant, we do find that that tends to be somewhat more of the default, and it can actually be really empowering and moving and exciting to see characters who are a little bit older or who maybe aren't even that much older than your typical protagonist but happen to be experiencing things that are typically more present with a certain amount of years under your belt, which is why I like periodically doing this style of video. If you are interested in seeing more books with adult characters after getting through this, then I'll have my other videos linked, and I will continuously keep track of stories that happen to have adult perspectives within them so that as we move forward, we continue to have this list updated. Kicking it off, the first book today is actually a newer fantasy release, and that would be Ambessa, Chosen of the Wolf. This is tied to Arcane and League of Legends, but if you've not consumed that story in any capacity, don't worry, you don't have to in order to still enjoy this story. I do think if you have some connection there, then you have a little bit more of an inkling to turn the page, a little bit more motivation because you know a lot of these characters ahead of time. But again, you don't have to have checked out Arcane. On the back, it actually says warrior, general, mother, and even though that's a relatively surface level way to categorize everything about this character, it actually captures her pretty well and captures what you're exploring thematically with her. I actually went into it thinking that it was solely going to be from her perspective, but you do actually get other perspectives interwoven throughout, which I think really enhanced the story overall. And what the story is a line of succession plotline. This is a character who was primarily raised by her grandfather, who at the beginning of the story is on his deathbed. He's about to pass away, and he has yet to name his heir to this clan, this family. And she is certain that she is going to be named heir, but she knows that it's going to be a very messy transition if her grandfather doesn't solidify her as the heir. And as you might expect, something happens to him before he's able to give this heir announcement. And this sets Ambessa and her cousin against each other. And as I stated, not only is it a line of succession plotline, but you also get a lot of action and you really explore all the ways that Ambessa was raised to have a certain code of conduct, a certain moral compass, and how she starts to have that questioned and it starts to crack just in being a parent and how she tries to impose her beliefs and what she's been taught onto her children. But she sees the way that her children resist and she loves them and she wants to sort of mold them into what she thinks is going to result in them being the safest and the most protected. However, she also wants them to flourish in their own ways, and she also somewhat enjoys when there's a spark of resistance in them because that actually fits within her view of what makes them strong, but the things that they resist are the things that she thinks are important. And so it's actually a really interesting clash to explore. As the story progresses, she very much is questioning who she can trust, what she's done in the past, and how it impacts what is happening now in the present. And there is a general sort of looking back. Hindsight is 2020. Could things now have been different if she had been a different person in the past? But if she'd been a different person in the past, she wouldn't have everything she has today. And there are other individuals you care about, and you have certain obligations. For her, she has obligations because she believes that she is the rightful heir to this family. And so she has certain things that she's trying to put in place as a result of that. And having all these responsibilities and being pulled in so many different directions, I just think is something that is really well explored with this character. Next up, we have The Warm Hands of Ghosts. And just a quick little heads up, some of you might know that this didn't personally work for me. I always try to recommend books regardless of whether they fit my taste or not, just because I know everybody has very different tastes from one person to the next. And so I want to ensure that if you think it sounds good and it seems like something you would like, that I still am able to present the information to you. So the setup for this story is that you are following this young woman who was previously involved in a war, and she has returned home due to some injury. She was a nurse. She's returned home. She lost her parents. Her brother has yet to be found. He was a soldier, and she's just trying to return to everyday life. But as you can imagine, this is near impossible given all of the trauma that she has witnessed. So you actually go back and forth between her perspective and her missing brother. And her brother is reported to be dead, but there are certain things about his death that seem suspicious. They don't really seem to line up. She believes that he's actually out there, and so she puts it on herself to return to Europe, where she's going to try and find him, or at the very least find more information about what happened to him. And then you are exploring what happened to him when you are looking at his perspective. Both these characters are on the younger side. I do think this is an example of they feel older because of everything that has happened. Not anyway trying to imply that trauma somehow matures you and turns you into a well-adjusted adult, but sometimes there is something to your innocence being taken. You have to grow up much faster because you don't have your parents anymore. In the case of the sister, she is the older sister. She feels this need to try and protect her younger brother, who she is so desperate to try and find. And there's this fact of life that you just have to do a little bit more when you are alone in the world. And she's also somebody who is relatively stoic. And I actually think that the book mirrors that in the writing style itself, because there is this lack of feeling for a lot of her perspective. But I think that mirrors what she is experiencing internally. She is somebody who has seen so much. She has endured so much. She is not really coming to terms with everything that has happened with her brother. She's somewhat in denial, but she's somewhat hopeful. But it almost seems as if she's turned everything off just so she can continue day-to-day life. And I think by having this sort of lackluster writing style, it's matching everything that she's experiencing. Her brother's perspective is where this story sort of becomes a little bit more fantasy and speculative. It borders on magical realism at times, but it can get quite dark and quite sinister. So just kind of a heads up that it's almost a genre bender in a sense. But regardless, I do think that that feeling of you're just trying to put one foot in front of the other, you're just trying to get by, you're just trying to survive, is something that everybody can experience at various different points in life. But I do think that when you have certain things that are falling on your shoulders, even more so, you have to take this on. I think this is especially true for parents. Just in talking to friends that are parents, talking to my mom, talking to people that have kids, there are times in your life where it just feels like everything is crumbling, but you have to hold it together for someone else or because you need to do something. And I just find that that was really, really present within The Warm Hands of Ghosts. Next up, we have a story that definitely captures aspects of being an adult in a way that I think is far less rooted in trauma than perhaps the previous one. It's relatable in a way that's almost like, yeah, sometimes stuff just sucks and sometimes life is stressful, especially when it comes to your job. And that would be The Phoenix Keeper. I have such a soft spot for any kind of story that has mythical creatures or animal companions. So the very setup of this story was something that I gravitated towards solely for that. You have this character who works at a zoo, and she cares very much about the way in which they're trying to rehabilitate it. They're trying to ensure that certain animals who are right on the edge of extinction or are endangered, she cares about the conservation side of things. However, she doesn't get paid very much, and also in order to have the money to continue the conservation efforts, you do kind of have to have a certain flair at the zoo to ensure that wealthy patrons are going to continue to donate money. And that's the part of her job that she hates, that she's not good at, but she recognizes, I kind of have to take part in this if I want to ensure that the animals are cared for. And she especially very much cares about the phoenix at this particular zoo. She wants very badly for their zoo to be picked to try and have new phoenixes and baby phoenixes. And so that means trying to bring in another phoenix. So she's trying to basically argue her case. And it actually felt very contemporary in a lot of ways. And it felt very relatable, even though we're talking about a mythical creature. Just the idea of I have to do certain parts of my job that I don't like, even though I really like other parts. I have to basically go into overtime in order to try and attain the things that I think are actually best to try and enhance the parts of my job that I like. And then she has to start to prepare certain kinds of presentations, and she gets really nervous and anxious. She doesn't really like being around other people that much. And there are certain coworkers of hers that she doesn't really like as much, but they're really good at the other side of things. So she's got to work with them and get their advice. And it's very relatable, and it's something that so many of us, I think, can connect with. And while this is something that I think is more accurate to adults, I will say you can be pretty young and already start to connect with this. So I do think that this is something that is relatively centered around the adult experience, but adult from a very young age. Basically, if you've had a job, you can probably connect with a lot of what this character is experiencing. After that, we have a story that has arguably one of my absolute favorite characters, not just for their age. I just loved this character, and that would be the story A Sorceress Comes to Call. The older perspective does enter the picture a little bit later into the story, but they are very much playing a pivotal role. The setup is that you have this horrible sorceress who is very much abusing her daughter, who happens to be the other main character. And currently, the mother wants to try and marry a wealthy man so that her and her daughter are set for life and that they are going to have plenty of prestige and money. The sister of the wealthy man that the sorceress has her eye on happens to be the other perspective. And she has been around. She can sense very quickly, even though she doesn't know this woman is a sorceress, she can sense there's something about her that doesn't seem quite right. And she is very cunning and very witty, and she's very quietly sneaky. She has certain things about her that wouldn't typically make her this powerful, heroic character. She's not somebody who's fighting. She doesn't have a lot of skill in that kind of area. She's not somebody who has power from a place of politics or anything like that. But she's cunning and she's resilient. We started with a newer fantasy release, so we'll go ahead and end with a newer fantasy release as well. This is one that I've brought up a few times as of late, and that would be Greenteeth. So if you've seen me talk about this before, then you probably already have an idea of the setup. You follow two main characters, one of them who is this being who lives within this body of water, and the other is a human witch who gets thrown into this body of water after basically her village decides that she is evil. And she is meant to die. However, Jenny of the lake rescues her, finds out what happened to her, and they band together to try and ensure that she can return the human witch to her loving husband and children. Both Jenny and the human have a lot in common, but then, of course, given that they are different beings entirely, they have things that set them apart, and they kind of come together to have a really lovely friendship. The human witch character is somebody who has a family and a life that she so badly wants to return to, and this isn't a situation where oftentimes in these sorts of stories, you really don't feel like that's anything more but a backdrop, and it's just a little detail about the character. It is a driving motivation for her, and even though her husband and children aren't necessarily characters in their own right within the story, you feel how much she loves them, and that love is explored really, really well. It is something that drives her to continue to do what she does, and it's something that opens up the friendship between her and Jenny of the Lake even more. That's it for today of a list of some adult fantasy works with actual adult characters. As noted before, I have done this a few times, so I'll have other videos within, I guess you could say, this video series in the description bar down below, as well as links to all these in case you'd like to check them out for yourself. And I will continue to keep track of stories that I feel really utilize adult perspectives in a meaningful way so that I can continue to update this list. If you have any of your own recommendations, though, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.